British MPs have voted overwhelmingly to reject Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal.
Negotiate the United Kingdom's relationship with the European Union. Legislation will be introduced to provide for. They will continue the work of bringing the public.
Well, 202 members of Parliament voted in favour of the deal and 432 against, a defeat of 230 votes for May. Labour MPs have hailed the vote as a catastrophic defeat for May, the worst since the 1920s, and are now preparing for a vote of no confidence in May tomorrow. However, the Prime Minister says she has always insisted on an orderly Brexit deal, and her administration will make a statement on the way forward early next week. Well, Patrick Bond is a professor of political economy at the Wits School of Governance in Johannesburg and joins us now in studio. Professor, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you with us as always. The news coming in is that MPs have overwhelmingly voted against Mrs. May's deal. Where to from here? What happens next?
First, it's not that big a surprise. She really had about 150 solid, and her objective was to pull enough to at least get close to a break even, and having failed that, as everyone really expected, she has a tough choice. Does she want to go back, try and get a better deal? Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU negotiator, is standing by. They may, make some additional concessions to soften the way the Brexit would work. Or, much more interesting, would there be a vote of no confidence in the government? Now, she survived one last month for her own party's leadership, but what if Jeremy Corbyn, the increasingly popular leader of the Labour Party, was able to stitch together a new government? And what if he was able to call for a snap election? So those two scenarios also play out. Probably we'll know by early next week.
What does it mean, though? Does it mean that there will be no deal at all?
Right now, it looks like the scenario is a hard deal on the 29th, which is no deal, meaning you just basically get pushed out of the European Union, and all of those extremely complicated customs arrangements, border relationships, migration systems are basically broken, and nobody quite knows what to expect. For example, if you get to Heathrow, what's the system if you're European? There is talk that if you're British and you go to Europe, you've got to pay £7 to get a special new visa. Well, what if you're importing and exporting goods and you want to come through Northern Ireland? And is that the new hard border with Britain, or will there be a soft border because of Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland now having smoothed over many of their religious difficulties? It's such an incredibly complex and very powerful dilemma, because it could put the EU into a recession. Britain's not doing well economically. This is a tough time to be messing around with these very important institutional problems.
Yeah, and just going through the internet now, I see that Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, has tabled a motion of no confidence in the government, which will be voted on tomorrow. Does that mean that Mrs. May will be out of office much sooner than she had anticipated?
Well, that could be. I don't have a sense of how those votes might play out.
And also given the antagonisms that has been displayed towards her.
Oh yeah, and her own party, obviously key people running away, like Boris Johnson, just dropping her because he felt she was negotiating so weakly. Now, if, say, Corbyn can stitch together a group of dissidents from across the range of parties, yes, that could be quite interesting, because a no confidence could mean he could gather enough forces to be more or less a minority government. Or that the situation would be in such chaos that a snap election would be logical, and he may well win that.
And do they have the necessary carte blanche to go back to Brussels to get a bit more concessions for the deal?
Well, in Europe they've decided to play hardball, so it means, I think, they're ready to see what happens on March 29th if they can't come up with something that's suitable. It does look like, with this very profound vote against her, Theresa May doesn't have much negotiating power. If she had been a little bit closer and said, no, we can squeeze a few more concessions, win a few more MPs and do another vote, that would have been one thing. But now that was a devastating loss. It may well be the end of her career. Let's see what happens tomorrow. She says by early next week, if she does win the conference, she'll have some plan B. We'll see.
Do you know what that plan B could entail?
Just a series of additional deals that might soften at the edges. She's even got her own Democratic Ulster Party, the group from Belfast that have put her into power, very angry at the way this Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland border debate's going. So she might win a couple of concessions there, but no, I think she's got to fear for something much more serious, which is that the logic of conservatives running a relatively globalized, a free trade economy is over. And her own revolt from her far right, the cultural right-wingers who said, we don't like Europe anymore, is now being matched by a surge from the left, and that would be Jeremy Corbyn's Labour. He's not an ordinary Labour MP. He's not like Tony Blair or Gordon Brown. He's a serious old-time socialist, and that may, like the United States, where there's also a social democratic current rising, may signal a new kind of politics in the north, and I think that might be quite a breath of fresh air after the sort of stagnation of the neoliberals and the conservatives.
Right, and if they eventually pull the plug on her and her career, who could possibly replace her?
Yes, well, I mean, Boris Johnson has had a chance before, and he's usually the one. Jacob Rees-Mogg is also very ambitious. I mean, these are characters who would be inheriting such a divided party. And I should add that it's not simply in the old Tory conservative philosophy that there's some profound problems. It's with the far right, the UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party, which surprisingly really was the driver of Brexit. If you recall back in 2016, there were the cultural right-wingers who wanted to pull out and get more state sovereignty, didn't like immigrants, a lot of racism involved in the sort of Brexit camp. And then the big question is, will the big working class vote from north of England that's very deindustrialized, struggling, will they move to the left, as they seem to do in the middle of 2017? They moved out of UKIP and then into Jeremy Corbyn's party. And if Corbyn picks that momentum up, keeps his progressive base in London, and he might have a governing coalition that could last some time, and they make some big changes in Britain that suddenly make the society a lot more satisfied and less angry at this current status quo.
Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker has just tweeted, I'm going to read you that tweet. He says that I take note with regret of the outcome of the vote in the House of Commons this evening. I urge the UK to clarify its intentions as soon as possible. Time is almost up. Hashtag Brexit. What does that tell you about what his attitude would be to the new government should Mrs. May be pushed out tomorrow?
Well, I think, as I say, they're playing hardball, and this is partly because they've got a very strong German sort of economic strength at the core of Europe, and the people who go up against it, like the Greeks, until the middle of 2015, they were fighting hard against it, or some Portuguese, some Spanish, now the Italians may fight. They all know what it is to fight Northern Europeans, the Germans, Juncker from Belgium. They'll know that they don't make concessions very easily, and I think that's been the big dilemma. They really demanded too much power in the center of Europe and too much economic inequality as a result, which means a lot of people in that part of the world are very alienated, and Brexit is one of the results.
Would that have adverse effects perhaps on the other Commonwealth countries across the world as a result of this deal? Well,
actually, it's interesting that as Brexit unfolded the last couple of years, the Brits began to try to generate, some of them called it Empire 2.0. That's disgusting, but that's the phrase. And the Commonwealth is the vehicle. So we've been seeing a lot more. In fact, even the last few days, Rob Davies, our Trade and Industry Minister, was trying to figure out, okay, if our deals with Europe are affected because so many of them have sort of British entry points, will there be a British South African free trade agreement? Will Brits come in and negotiate a better deal? And I would be a little doubtful. I mean, one of the delightful things about all of this is that if you're European, you knew that when the Brits came to the negotiating table, they were pretty mean. I mean, you had people like Peter Mandelson, and they were some of the hard-line, dogmatic neoliberals who really wanted to break down social solidarity in favor of corporations. I would worry that if the Brits move those people out of the EU sort of zone and push them into negotiations, even with someone as talented as Rob Davies, we might be in trouble. And I think a lot of the Commonwealth countries will say, Britain's not that great, an old colonial power coming back interested in us again out of their own desperation. They're pushing too hard. Maybe we should have a strategy against them.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Well, that is a Professor of Political Economy at the Wits School of Governance in Johannesburg, Patrick Bond. Well, the breaking news this hour, British MPs voted overwhelmingly to reject Theresa May's Brexit deal.